Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Macon Campbell and this is maconSTUFF. So in my last video you saw me make my very first ring. Now for my very first ring I'm really happy with how it turned out. It started off its life as a stainless steel nut which I turned down into a ring core, and then I used one of these teak blanks that I made for the outer of the ring, and I must say it turned out really nice, if I do say so myself. Now since then, off camera, I have made another ring, and this one is for myself. This one was made pretty much the same, except I used two different kinds of wood for this one. This one was maple and rosewood, and the core of the ring and the outer turned out to be a whole lot thinner than the first one that I made. It's a very comfortable fit and I have pretty much been wearing it ever since I made it. Now, as I've mentioned in my last video, the inspiration for making rings were the skull rings made by Leroy's Wooden Tattoos. And now, seeing as I've made two rings already and I've kind of got a system down for how I'm making them, I think it's time that I go ahead and I try my first skull ring. So I went ahead and I printed out some reference images. These are pictures of the rings that I found on Leroy's Wooden Tattoos Instagram page, and I'm going to be leaning on these heavily as reference for the skull ring that I'm going to try and carve. Now, as you can see, this is basically like a half skull, as it doesn't have the lower jawbone, which means that I don't need such a big piece of wood, and it also means a little bit less detail for me to get wrong. Now let me just say off the bat, I'm pretty sure that my ring isn't going to look nearly as nice as any one of these, but the point is to try and get it as close to this as possible. So, as with the other rings that I've made, I'm going to start out turning the core for the ring. I'm going to make it the same size as this one because I plan on wearing it on the same finger. Once I've got that done, I'm going to choose a piece of wood. I'm leaning towards a nice piece of rosewood that I've got here that has a fairly nice pattern in it. And I'll first turn the inside of the outer to fit the core. And once that's done, it's going to be all about hand carving. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different with this core. Someone mentioned on my last video that instead of using the lathe to mill out the inside of the nuts, I can get the bulk of the thread removed by using a file. So in the interest of saving my lathe tools a little bit, I'm going to give that a shot and see if that works any better. So I'm going to stop talking now and let's get started. Okay, so I'm done with the core of the ring. I'm probably still going to do a bit of polishing on the inside off camera, but for the most part it's ready for the ring. Now, speaking of the ring, as I mentioned earlier, this is the piece of rosewood that I was talking about. As you can see, it has quite an interesting grain pattern on this side over here. The only thing that's holding me back on this is the color. For a skull, I really wanted to have a more natural color. I was hoping for something darker. I could use the teak again, but I've already used the teak. So earlier I went to a local furniture manufacturer to have a look through some of their offcut hardwoods, and I managed to find this piece of oak, which also looks really nice. Now, as you can see, there is some interesting grain pattern in here as well. The only thing that worries me about this is that the grain on this is fairly coarse. It's quite a similar grain texture to ash. So I'm not sure how well I'm going to be able to carve detail into this wood. But I'm liking the color of this wood, and I'm hoping that the texture is going to give me a nice result on my carving. So I'm going to cut out a piece of this oak, get a hole sized in there for a core, and then we can get started carving this skull. So let's do it. Okay, so here's where we are right now. Now I don't know what I was expecting for my very first try, but I was hoping that it would look a lot better than this. So far it's looking more like a gorilla than it's looking like a skull. Another thing I will say is that this oak is not very easy to carve. All the different textures in this grain and all the different directions does make it really inconsistent when carving. I'm also really struggling to get in a whole lot of the smaller details like the teeth and some other things. I'm thinking that I just don't have small enough burrs to get in all those finer details. I'm going to see if I can use this sharp one to try and get in some more detail in those teeth. I might also try and thin down the outside of this ring. The ring blank is still fitting in there fairly nicely. I am going to have to do a little bit of trimming to make it fit. So even though it's not looking as awesome as I'd hoped it would, I'm not going to stop now. I'm just going to push on and see what I end up with. At best, it will look like a really nice skull ring. At worst, I'll have learned from this experience and it will help me with my next ring. So let me get started. Okay, well that's about as far as I think I'm gonna take it. I've probably spent like 5-6 hours, maybe even more. I could easily spend double that trying to get more detail in here, but with the skills and the tools that I have at the moment, I think that's the best I can do. So I'm gonna go ahead now and glue in this ring core. And once that's dry, I can trim away the excess of the core over here. And once that's done, depending on how I feel, I might go ahead and try and add a little bit more detail, or at least do a bit more sanding and maybe polishing. And then I've got to figure out what I'm going to do in terms of a finish for this ring. So let's go. Okay, so it's actually been a couple of days because I've been off doing other things, but now I'm back, so let's get started on this. As you can see, it's nicely dried now, so now I'm just going to go ahead and use one of these stone burrs to true up the core over here so that it's nice and flush with the ring, and then I'm going to go ahead and sand and add a couple of finishing touches to this ring before we go ahead and finish it. So let's do it. Okay, there we go guys, it's done, and I guess I'll say I'm relatively happy with that. You could call this project both a failure and a success. If you compare it to the images that I was trying to copy, then I guess you could call it a failure because it definitely doesn't look as nice as any one of these. But if you take into consideration this is the first time that I've ever tried anything like this, then I suppose you could call it a success. It does kind of still look like a hybrid between a skull and a gorilla, or perhaps even a gorilla skull, but be that as it may, I think it still turned out okay for my first try, and with any luck it can hopefully just get better from here. I think to learn how to flush out the details of an anatomically correct skull a bit better, I think in the future I might try a little bit of a larger size skull carving, then instead of doing a ring, just doing a full skull, and trying to get a little bit more familiar with all the shapes and the details required to make a skull. So that might be something that you can look forward to in the future. But with all that said, once again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. It would also be great if you could share this video with some of your friends. And if you have any comments or suggestions or questions, go ahead and drop them down in the comment section below. And once again, till next time, keep making stuff.